Now, in the last lesson, we've written the code that's required to trigger a payment request in the payment queue to the Apple App Store. And we've specified the product that we want to purchase, or the user wants to purchase. And we set up this payment queue updated transactions delegate method, which observes for any changes in the payment queue and lets us know when a transaction is purchased and successful or when it's failed. So now we are going to create a Sandbox user in order to test this without having to pay every single time we test it. So let's go into, again, App Store Connect, and we're going to go to Users and Roles here. So just click on this drop-down list to head over there. And if you head over to Sandbox Testers, then you can create some new testers by clicking on this plus button. Now, rather awkwardly, Apple actually enforces very strong data validation in this Sandbox user creation, and I really wish they didn't, because often I'm forced to create 10 or 20 of these users, and for every single one of them you have to fill out pretty much every single field. So it doesn't really matter what you give the first name or the last name. I usually just write something like test, but the email has to be unique, and it has to be a real email, which is quite difficult if you're not a professional spammer. How would you have access to even 10 emails that you own? So here's a trick. If you have a Gmail address that is, say, angela@gmail.com, this unfortunately is not my email because I wasn't there fast enough. Need to be an earlier adopter. But if, say, this was your email, then Gmail actually has a really neat thing called address alias. And what it allows you to do is just before the @ sign, you can add a plus and you can write some things like newsletter, right? And you can use this email for all of the newsletters that you sign up to, and you can filter on this incoming email address in your Gmail inbox. But even though it looks a little bit weird, it still goes to your email address, your inbox. So angela@gmail.com's inbox in this case. Now, what I often like to do is sometimes when I sign up to something that I'm not really that sure about, say if I sign up to American Express, right? I will actually sign up with my email plus the address that I signed up to at gmail.com. And this is a really easy way to know which businesses are selling your emails for money and to just protest. But this is a really neat trick, and this is helpful in our case because now you have an infinite variety of unique email addresses. So you can just keep creating new aliases for every single one of your testers. Now, there's just one caveat. The main email for your email alias cannot already belong to an Apple ID. So say if you sign up to your Apple ID with this email address, you can't use an alias on it. It doesn't work. But if you haven't used this email, this Gmail address for any Apple IDs, then you can do this quite easily. Now, another option, if you don't have many emails that you can use for your Sandbox testers, is to use something like maildrop.cc. And this allows you to just generate a random mailbox, and it will be able to receive messages, and you'll be able to verify the account, but you obviously don't monitor it, and it doesn't have a painful creation process. But what it does mean, though, is that it is a public account. So if you go to some of the ones that somebody might have already used, say john@maildrop.cc, then you can see that this has all of the stuff that they've previously signed up to, and there's a lot of spam in here, right? So if you use any of these accounts on maildrop.cc, remember that it's completely public. Do not sign up for anything that has your private details in it using this service. But if you're using it for just testing, then it doesn't really matter because there's nothing sensitive that's going to be sent to it. So in my case, I'm just going to generate a new email address on our website domain that is called tester134@londonappbrewery.com. And the password, rather awkwardly, also has very strict security rules. So you need one capital letter and some numbers, and it needs to be quite long. So come up with some sort of combination for that. And the secret question and secret answer, you can take it very seriously if you want to, but I tend to just write tester Q, tester A, because it has to be more than 6 characters or something like that. And date of birth, of course, just some random numbers. And App Store territory, you should choose the App Store that your testing device is currently signed into. So for example, I live in the UK, so my App Store, my native App Store that my testing device is normally set to is the UK territory. So I'll go and find United Kingdom and add that in there. If your device is normally signed into United States territory, then be sure to select that. And once you're done, go ahead and click save, and you'll have this brand new Sandbox user ready to go. So now we are ready to run our app onto our physical device, which is the phone. And we're going to make sure that the team is selected so that it will sideload. And I'm going to plug in my phone through USB, and I'm going to select my device as the destination and run this app. So now while the app is running, I'm going to click on the home button and I'm going to go into settings. And inside settings, I'm going to scroll down to iTunes and App Store. And I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom where it says Sandbox account. And here I'm going to click on it and sign out of any previous Sandbox accounts you've got going on. And I'm going to sign in with that new user that I just created. He was called Tester134 at londonappbrewery.com. And I'm going to enter the password of that user that I set up just now and click sign in. So now my Sandbox account is showing that my Tester134 is now signed in, and I'm going to go ahead and relaunch that app inspo quotes. Now you can rerun it from Xcode, but as long as you haven't force quit the app, this is still a active session. So now if I click on get more quotes, then you can see I get this pop-up, enter your password to confirm your in-app purchase of 1 premium quote for 99p. So I'm going to enter my password for my test user, and I'm going to click buy. And now we wait for a little bit, and you can see that I get a pop-up that says you are all set, your purchase was successful in the app, and in the debug console I get that print statement, transaction successful, which means that if you look inside quote table view controller, the part where that transaction successful gets printed is inside this if statement. If transaction.transaction state is equal to .purchased, so a successful transaction, then print this. So now you can see that we can change the code inside this block to give the user whatever it is that they paid for, extra coins, extra fish, extra quotes in this case. Then we can implement that right here. So hey, it's actually working. Now, there's just one thing to remember, that if you make a purchase that's been successful with a Sandbox user, that user won't be able to make the same purchase again if your in-app purchase is a non-consumable product. So remember that when we created our in-app purchase of premium quotes, we created it as a non-consumable product because the user shouldn't need to buy it multiple times. They should only pay once to get rid of the ads or pay once to get the extra quotes and never again. And the way that Apple implements it is that your Sandbox users can only purchase a non-consumable product once in their whole lifetime. They can restore purchases that they've bought before, but they can't keep buying the same non-consumable product. So this is why you end up creating loads and loads of test users and Sandbox accounts. And this is also why you need some alternative emails in order to do this. So now we have written the code that implements the basic functionality of creating a new payment request and adding it to the payment queue to ask the user for their password and to purchase that in-app purchase. And we've got this delegate method that listens for when that's successful and when it's not. And we've created a Sandbox user that can allow us to test these payments without having to cough up. And we can activate blocks of our code when the transaction is successful or when the transaction has failed. Now, once the payments have been successful or they have failed, we need to end our transaction so we're not still holding on to the same transaction. So inside the if statement, when our transaction has completed, we're going to write skpaymentQ.defaultQ.finish transaction, and the transaction that we want to terminate is the current transaction that is in question. And we're going to copy that code over to here as well. And finally, even though we are checking to see if there was an error, we're not actually being very explicit with what the error was. And with skpaymentQ and StoreKit, we can actually get a really accurate description of what the error was, so it can guide our debugging if we do get any problems. So let's use optional binding to say if let error equal transaction dot error. So if there was an error, if it's not nil, then let error description equal error.localized description. So instead of just printing transaction failed, I'm going to move that down here and we're going to print transaction failed due to error, and I'm going to insert that error description into here. So now that's a little bit more comprehensive, and that will be really useful when we do have some payment issues that we're testing. So that, in a nutshell, is how you implement in-app purchases. In the next lesson, we're going to enable the user to be able to access the rest of the premium quotes in addition to the free quotes after the purchase has been successful. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson.